there.
अच्छा. Praful, like you, I'm also a proxy member of the Bay Area groups.
Good morning.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi guys, Bharat here.
Hi, Bharat.
Imagine I'm going to be not on video, so.
Coffee pee या नहीं?
नहीं यार, कल रात को आए, रात को 2 बजे, तो it's like you don't want to meet me just now.
Okay. You had a good trip? You are mostly in Bombay, na?
You're talking to me, Bharat?
Hmm.
No, I normally go to Bombay, but go to Nasik a lot because Sonia's sister and mom are there in Nasik.
अच्छा.
So Bombay तो होता ही है, तो Bombay से नासिक गाँव जाते हैं.
अच्छा अच्छा.
दिल्ली तो होता ही है, दिल्ली, Bombay, नासिक.
Good.
This time had chance to meet the Bombay gang, courtesy Khushru and everybody else.
I saw photographs.
Yeah.
खुशरो शायद चला गया है.
I think he set it on recording and he probably left.
Yeah, because I don't see any recording option for me. So वो लगा हुआ होगा.
No, there was a bar saying recording has started and.
Yeah, okay.
If you look at the participant list, Saurabh, it says that something is being recorded.
Is it? Okay, oh yeah, okay, there's a red button. You're right.
There's something there that says.
Yeah.
So let me know when to start.
Maybe we should start. Everyone knows that. अभी 2 मिनट रुक जाते हैं. 9:05 पे शुरू करते हैं.
Okay.
Good evening, guys, and
Hi.
good morning, I guess, the folks in US. Hope all are well and looking forward to the talk.
All good, yeah.
Good.
Bharat, you are muted.
Kapuria, where are you next in the Bay Area?
Next in the Bay Area, I'm trying to make it 21st June.
Oh, okay.
I'm there 24th through 28th June.
So I'm going to be in New York.
I think something's being organized because Dilip is going to be there 21st to 24th. I have a quarterly workshop from 25th to 27th, so I'll be there 24th to 28th.
Okay.
So Rajiv, is mostly business that takes you there to the Bay Area? Or?
Yeah, work. Yeah.
Okay, great.
No, he's selling a lie. He comes there for the hike, the weather.
Sure. Yeah, I would when I get a chance, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, let's. So Sundeep, you've been a TCS guy for a long time in life.
Yeah, I've been a TCS guy for a long time.
I think throughout. I don't think you ever changed jobs. That was the first job you took, is it?
Yeah, but see, when I joined it, it was Tata Unisys.
Oh, joined.
Then
Oh, okay. You joined
Unisys.
Tata Burrows, huh? What became Unisys
Yeah,
and then so on. Okay.
Exactly. I outlasted
When did
those
you join
companies.
Tata Unisys? Sorry?
I outlasted the companies. So I joined in 1994.
Okay, Hebalkar had left by then, I guess.
Yes, just left.
Okay.
So Sundeep, what did you do before that between 82 and 94?
I was helping my dad with his business. He had a pharmaceutical business.
Oh, okay. Mhm.
And I was, doing a little bit of dabbling a little bit in software and
Okay.
losing money.
Yeah, okay.
While I was losing money, one day in frustration, I said, there's got to be a better way to do this, and wound up in the PhD program at IIT Bombay.
Oh,
I
okay.
think we should start now. It's 9:06.
Okay. Okay, sounds good.
So, I'm interacting with many of you guys after a very long time. So, when Saurav said, do a cybersecurity thing, that, what I'm going to talk about is the practical challenges we face in implementing cybersecurity effectively in India. So, in that sense, it's a little bit of a narrower talk. It's not a tech talk, it's practical challenges that we face in India when we're trying to address this issue of cybersecurity. So let me just share my screen.
संदीप अपना थोड़ा सा माइक्रोफोन सेंसिटिविटी इंक्रीज कर लेना यार, your voice is
नजदीक आ जाता हूँ.
it's a little
Yeah,
low.
so is it better now?
Yeah, thank you.
Marginally. So what I'll do is I'll change my spectacles and come closer. And I'll speak a little louder also.
Thank you.
So everybody can see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
when there's some talk about cybersecurity, depending on who the stakeholder is, there are different concerns that people have. And so they all think they're talking about cybersecurity. But depending on the stakeholder group, their concerns are actually maybe different. So if you look at the typical concerns that individuals have, when individuals are talking about cybersecurity, or you have a collection of people and they're people talking about their own individual problems, they're talking about losing money, they're talking about losing data, they're talking about health impacts, privacy loss. That's the kind of thing that they are talking about. So if you're a citizen, what are you actually relying on? So while there's a lot of talk, a lot of discussion, the number of things you can actually do are relatively few. So you rely upon the device manufacturers to keep their mobile devices safe. So either in the Apple ecosystem or you're in the Android Google ecosystem, you have a desktop or laptop, some people may have basic antivirus software. There are some security features that product or service vendors might offer as part of their product or service offering. And a very small number of people follow good cyber hygiene. And these people keep trying to evangelize these good practices and so on. But this is what practically individuals can do. But they expect something. They expect the government to provide some suitable cybersecurity safeguards by way of laws and regulations. And they expect product and service providers to deliver secure products and services. So in the discourse, although this is an important issue at the top of mind of everybody, as a citizen, what you can do about it is relatively little. And so there's an expectation that the ecosystem somehow will address this in the form of vendors, either offering some features competitively or being compelled through law and regulation to do this. And if there are failures, if there are bad consequences, there is an expectation of enforcement. By lose money, the police should be good enough to be able to detect and recover the money, etc. So this is a citizen. If you look at the government view, the typical cyber security concerns that they will talk about. One of the top things they talk about is security of national critical infrastructure, however that is defined. For some people, it may be the ministries. For some people, it may be the power system, healthcare. Every country has some definition of national critical infrastructure. But in their discourse, that is one of the top of mind things. The second thing is industrial espionage aimed at their important industries. And there was a time where the US government became concerned that China was somehow carrying out very organized industrial espionage aimed at some industries that they thought were critical, which were basically defense, aerospace, and all that. And so the US government initiated various kinds of programs aimed at making sure that their own industrial complex addresses these cybersecurity issues adequately. So that's a worry for all governments. It's a worry for the Indian government as well. The third thing that they are worried about is the use of cyber channels to carry out some activity which is inimical to national security and or public order. That's how they phrase it. Yeah. Which could be espionage or it could be subversion. And the last thing is influence operations where the targets are not IT or other connected infrastructure, but human minds. So the target of the attack using cyber channels is not to infiltrate computing infrastructure, but it is to create narratives that will influence human minds. Right? Narratives, fake news. And so these are the kinds of things that governments talk about when they talk about cybersecurity or in the Indian scene, when there are conferences where government speakers come up. These are the kinds of things that they are saying. And what do they actually do? Enact laws, promulgate policies, regulations that provide for some civil and criminal penalties for certain kinds of behavior, place obligations and compliance requirements on citizens and organizations. And they engage in catalyzed capacity building. So from the government standpoint, there is a need for some defensive capabilities and there's need for some offensive capabilities as well. And awareness programs. So are we being able to detect the huge amount of petty cybercrime that we have? Or is it better to spend money on awareness so that you can reduce the incidence a little bit? Okay? And they're also trying to create some infrastructural ecosystems that are intended as some foundational building blocks. And from the Indian government point of view, they have their own articulation of something which they call India Stack. And there are security components like Aadhaar and other such stuff. So that's another thing that they try to do. But they need to ensure that their own organizations adopt acceptable cybersecurity postures. So government, I mean, if you look at government, there are some large entities in government. These entities may be well funded. And there may be small entities. Today, a Zilla Parishad or a Gram Panchayat, these entities also hold a lot of data. So with this, kind of diversity in what a government organization might be, the last bullet is the particularly challenging one. While you have all kinds of laws and so on, in practical terms, how do you make sure that all your own organizations are at some minimal level of compliance? And just as an example, I'll just show you some stuff that government organizations are expected to comply with. So you can still see my screen, right? Yeah, any one of you can see my screen, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I have a kind of an office order. Now, this has gone from an entity called CERT-in to all ministries. And it has gone to the Ministry of Higher Education as well. Ministry of Education and Department of Higher Education has sent this to all the major higher education establishments. So this has come to IIT Bombay as well. There's a terse letter saying that, look, there are some guidelines and you need to comply with these guidelines. Now, what are these guidelines? It's a fairly complex document. It's a 76-page document which says a lot of things. Right? Now, applicability, scope, policy measures, network, identity access management, application security, so on. Right? Now, this has come to IIT Bombay as well. And there's an obligation here somewhere that you also have to have a third party who will come and audit whether you're doing all these things. So what is happening is that these directions and guidelines are going to various institutes who are ignoring them because they can't fathom what is it that they should actually do to comply. So why that is, we'll just look at. But this is the kind of detailed guidance that government is giving. It's giving this to IITs, it's probably giving similar stuff to Gram Panchayats also. So let's look at the third kind of stakeholder, which is an enterprise. What are the things that they are talking about? They're talking about reputation and consequent business loss arising from inability to protect their IT systems. Reputation and consequent business loss arising from failure to deliver secure services or services securely. Loss of some competitive advantage, IPR loss, reputation loss, regulatory fines and penalties. And this inherent cross-border nature of the internet and consequently of the cybersecurity causes jurisdictional conflicts and raises the compliance burden and creates ambiguity. So, what jurisdiction is a particular regulation to be understood in? So, is cyberspace lawless, or is it a space where laws of all applicable jurisdictions are simultaneously applicable? And if that results in a contradiction, as an enterprise, you still have to take some position and be prepared to be sued if somebody doesn't agree with that position. Yeah. So they always look for some clarity in terms of what are the minimum things I should do to say that I am compliant. And because this is inherently cross-border, what is the forum at which this discussion will happen? So if the Indian government decides that they want a particular approach to privacy, Europe decides it's going to be GDPR. If our approaches are in conflict, where is it that we resolve these differences? So that's a typical concern, and that also shows up when this is being discussed or in conferences where all these stakeholders are present at the same time. So what do they actually do? So they need to systematically manage their cybersecurity obligations, demonstrate compliance with those obligations, and manage the risks associated with failures. So usually they will implement some sort of cyber information security management system, and the most commonly implemented system is based on ISO 27000 family of standards. So they're faced with procuring and implementing or operating a very diverse and somewhat large array of security tools and systems, creating a need for hyper specialized skills. But typically, every enterprise, even a medium enterprise, will deploy at least 8 or 9 distinct security systems. They will have some identity management system, they will have an anti malware system, they will do multi factor authentication, they will have a security operating center, and each of these will keep upgrading. There will be versions, and so you will need people who are familiar with the specific versions of the tools that you are doing. So here is a situation where you suddenly are seeing a proliferation of skills that you need to do some basic job of even operating a set of tools that you've implemented as part of some standard. And 27,000 is by no means a sort of a lightweight standard. It is, I would say, beyond the reach of all but the largest organizations in India today. For most people, it's not practical. Something that's a cut down version of 27,000, which is like the CERT guidance that I showed you, that is something that's practical. But even that seems to be too much for most organizations in India. So, just to give you a brief flavor, this is what ISO 27001 expects you to do. They look upon cybersecurity as being composed of several domains. So, such as information security policies, organization of information security, human resource security, asset management, access control, cryptography, etc. And each of these areas, so to speak, of cyber security, there are certain controls that you would be expected to implement. And if you look at this, for example, there are 14 controls in access control. And what is the granularity of a control? Look at that. The controls are expressed at a fairly high level of granularity. So, as an example, so communications and operations management. 10.1 Operational procedures and responsibilities to ensure the correct and secure operation of information processing facilities, documented operating procedures. And you can look at this level of description. To comply with this, somebody might have some very, very superficial documentation. There may be organizations that have volumes of information. And so there is a considerable amount of subjectivity. Okay? And what a particular auditor will accept in a given context is very variable. So this is the situation that an enterprise faces. And many parts of government are, in a sense, enterprise-like in terms of the fact that they also operate IT systems and they have to do exactly the same things that an enterprise does to make sure their IT systems are operating securely. So this is the overall situation. This is the situation that exists. And what are the challenges? The big challenge is that you have adversarial positions between the stakeholders. So there is the government versus citizens position, where the government articulates a national security requirement, and this conflicts with or is adversarial to the citizens' notion of privacy. If you look at government versus enterprises, there is a compliance burden versus ease of doing business. And there is the issue where the government will exert or will assert some cyber sovereignty in terms of data localization, that my data should remain on servers that are physically in my territory. The reaction to that will be action by other countries, reciprocal action. So let's say you have a tremendous amount of data localization laws in each jurisdiction. How do you actually run a unified IT system? Do you run separate instances on servers in each physical geography? So this is the government versus enterprise adversarial position, and enterprises versus citizens. So here it's free and or personalized services versus privacy. So for most of the large internet players, the users are not their customers. The commercial transactions are not between the users and between the platforms. The commercial transactions are between the platforms and the people who pay for the advertising or the other kinds of data products that the platforms produce. So our consumer protection laws are ineffective. In the way that we have formulated consumer protection in India, a consumer must be a customer. So the legal mechanism or the legal mechanisms that we have traditionally used are breaking down because of this.
Sandeep, could you sort of elaborate on this point again? What do you mean by enterprise? Because individuals are not customers of enterprises. Could you just sort of elaborate on that?
Okay, so take the case of your use of Gmail. You're not paying Google for the use of Gmail, right? So there's no commercial relationship between Google and you. And for the consumer protection in India to be applicable, there has to be a customer relationship that you have with the person or with the entity that's providing you with the service or the product. But they are using your data, they are leveraging that data, and they're using it to create products that they're monetizing. But the way in which we have structured our consumer protection laws disqualify you from seeking redress under those laws because you don't get categorized as a consumer.
But is the same true in say US? Because if I'm sitting in the US, Gmail is using my data, then they're obliged to protect my data because you hear about leaks, etc., and all, but they're obliged to stop you about those issues, right? So
Yeah, so the thing is that in different geographies, we are seeing specific laws that now frame this as a data protection problem. Yeah, but in the past, we've had consumer protection legislation, which in some sense has protected you from defects So if you're using Gmail, and if you look at it, most people are using some form of free email. They're also using that email address as the recovery email address for things like their bank forgot password, etc., and for critical citizen services. So we're beginning to use something like that. If the service doesn't operate as advertised or as specified, you should have redress under some kind of consumer protection law. But the way in which consumer protection has been framed has been with an underlying assumption that the business model is that the users are the consumers as well, because they're the customers. Here we have a new business model where the users are, in a sense, performing a sort of unpaid labor in return for some features or facilities.
Thanks.
And
That's
that
that's a
unpaid labor, that unpaid labor is being monetized by the platform's real customers who are actually carrying out the commercial transactions. So it's a challenge for us because our legal systems also have to be shaped up for this kind of stuff to be resolved. The other thing is shifting of liability. Now, we know that OTP over SMS text message is not secure. We know that. Okay? So people will say, don't click links. And, Kapil sent me a really nice article where somebody was saying, what does a normal user do on any kind of mobile phone or on a computer? You click links, right? That's what you do. So how do you know which link to click or not? There's somebody who worked with me who received an SMS saying that your credit card loyalty points are going to expire. You just have to click this link and renew them. But clicking that link downloaded some malicious code onto the phone. And the action of that malicious code was to forward all the text messages to some command and control server. So now on your phone, okay, there's something that's reading your text message and forwarding it. And now the scamsters, they have your card number in any case. Carry out a transaction. The OTP comes to this, it gets forwarded to you. And in a space of about 20 seconds, there are 3 or 4 transactions that were made. And totally about maybe 4 or 5 lakhs was siphoned out. Yeah. Now this went to RBI, it went to the ombudsman and all that. Finally, RBI said that the bank is not liable since the bank implemented multi-factor authentication. But clearly that multi-factor authentication is not good enough because those transactions happened in some 20 seconds. Now, 4 transactions to happen in 20 seconds, even if you are going to read an OTP and key it in, I don't think you can do 4 transactions in 20 seconds. So some of this has become a way of externalizing the risk of the enterprise onto the user. So that's the second adversarial position, that's enterprise versus citizen. So there's a really good BBC short film on identity theft. So there's a guy receives a call from the bank, and bank tells him that, sir, yeah, I think somebody has stolen your identity. He's taken aback, goes to the mirror, looks at himself and says, no, I still appear to have it. So bank insists, no, somebody's stolen your identity. So now this guy starts getting worried and he asks, have they stolen any money? Bank says, yes, I'm afraid they've stolen your money. So this guy says, no, hang on. I think they've stolen the bank's money. So in the case of a physical branch with physical cash, if somebody attacks the bank infrastructure and makes away with the money, it's the bank's money. Unless the teller hands it to you and stolen from your hands. So this method of electronic record keeping and the use of technologies which have risks, which are not necessarily disclosed, leads to this confusing situation as to whose liability is it actually. And there's a nice paper. This is quite old. It's called Why Crypto Systems Fail. And this pertains to, I think, Barclays Bank or something many years ago. There was one guy who was responsible for the credit card system. And this guy would only generate 3 distinct pins, 3 default pins, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. Only 3. And a large number of people would not change those default pins. So this guy would clone the plastic card, move around all over the country, and try these 3 pins. And his success rate was phenomenal. So when this was found out, this resulted in a policy change in the UK saying that if a citizen or if a retail banking user disputes a transaction, the bank will make good the money and then the bank will prove its systems were not in error. So we are not at that situation here. We are running a situation where it is relatively easy for a service provider to externalize the risk associated with cybersecurity failures to the ordinary user. So these adversarial positions are a reality and they complicate the search for solutions that are acceptable to us. So let's look at the capacity challenges. And these capacity challenges are not specific to cybersecurity. It's just heightened in this area. So this is an extract from the latest WF report from Davos in Jan 2024. So India currently has a shortage of roughly 8 lakh cybersecurity professionals, and this against a global shortage of about 4 million. So these are the kind of numbers that, I mean, even in my role as the head for TCS's cybersecurity business, I always had at least 300 or 400 unstaffed positions that I could bill customers if I had the people. So we have these capacity challenges. And at a macro level in India, we have capacity challenges in all sectors. These are just some examples. Look at the judicial system. We have 15 judges per million. In comparison, the US is 150 and Europe is 210. So this is an order of magnitude shortage. It's not, a marginal thing. Look at the police system. We have 1.45 police people per 1,000. The US is 2.43. Now this 1.45 includes CRPF and all our paramilitary forces also, which are classified as police forces. Educational system. We have one school teacher for 35 pupils, US one for 16. And this one for 35 doesn't really tell the whole story. But these are the official numbers. Software development, India currently has 13 lakh digitally skilled professionals, whatever that means, and faces a shortage of 5 lakh such professionals. By 2026, this could turn into a shortage of 14 to 18 lakhs. Healthcare system. We have 0.9 doctors per 1,000 people, while the US is 2.6. You look at our radiologist numbers, India, one radiologist for every 100,000 people. In China, it's one for 15, and in the US is one for 10,000. So we have these gross capacity challenges in all sectors. So what are the factors that are contributing this? Either we don't have people who are adequately skilled, okay? We don't have enough educational training, skilling bandwidth to create them, or there's no money to pay salaries. So if I was suddenly to say, okay, I, assuming I can find the number of judges I need to get to a figure of about 50, 60, assuming you can find those people, how do I pay their salaries? So an exacerbating factor was cybersecurity is that generally higher salaries demanded by IT workers and even higher salaries demanded by cybersecurity workers. So for a government organization, you saw the kind of compliance burden. Now, the position of the person running IT there is saying that I just don't have enough manpower to even run my IT services. I just can't think of implementing any cybersecurity stuff. So with the budget that the guy has, okay, at the amount of money that government is willing to pay, the number of people you can get with IT skills or cybersecurity skills, that headcount also you can't fulfill. If you have the money to hire 10 people, because of the salary gap, you probably actually be able to hire only 5. So you look at our scaling problem, and all of you know this. Assuming that we can categorize the students coming into our universities by some measure. Okay? For argument's sake, let's say it's their 12 standard marks. That's their capability. And you have a small number of people with a very high capability. And then, as the numbers increase, the capability drops off sharply. But our reality means that we have only a very small number that we can train acceptably because of our training resource limitations. So that's the left-hand side of this chart. The effect it's producing on the right-hand side is that we are producing a small but highly capable elite, which is significant capability, which you might say is on par with the West anywhere. But the large mass we are producing is at a very low capability. Now, if you look at the green line, if in a particular area, the average guy, the capability that is needed, if our system is producing people that are above that, then you're fine. But if the system is producing people, your average capability is below what you need for any area, then you're in trouble. And I suspect we are operating in that region. Yeah? Because that's why everybody's complaining. We're not short of people. People are saying we don't have adequately skilled people. So the whole training engine is resulting in generating a capability that's falling below what we need as a bare minimum. So that's in practical terms where we are. So what are the plans to address these capacity shortages? Every ministry has some plans. they put out the numbers on resource shortages and so on and so forth. And all they're saying is, let's use IT to solve these problems. So let's do online service delivery, let's automate all kinds of stuff, right? And then let's use AI. So they're committed. This gross capacity shortage is forcing them into a situation where they're deploying more and more IT. And they are more and more susceptible to ideas that, AI will be able to automate a lot of this and so on. Yeah? But they're not spending enough money to even barely support these IT systems. So that's the next thing. When you begin to create systems that automate what you would expect from human beings, there is some expectation of trustworthiness. Yeah? So I'm using trustworthiness in a somewhat loose sense here. When we deliver services digitally, we will be required to address the issue of trustworthiness of the systems and of the services as well. So this requires defining and addressing trustworthiness of the construction of IT systems that are used to deliver these services, trustworthiness of the operations and support of IT systems that are used to deliver these services, and trustworthiness of the service delivery processes and outcomes that are required to be achieved. So in very broad terms, trustworthiness is cast as just the assurance that expectations will be met. So as a stakeholder, you have some expectations of a system. What is the assurance that those expectations will be met? And that's important for you, where you're going to automate things which you in the past had expected to be done by a human. So if there's something unexpected, you know whom to ask for in terms of an explanation. So look at what we're doing in IT. So to coin a term, we are softwareizing systems. This refers to replacing parts of a system with software running on a computer, or using computers running on a system to simulate an existing physical system. And having done that, the software is then considered to be the system. And the behavior of this software is considered to actually reflect what would happen in the real system. And we have many examples of all this. So when you softwareize a system, you are somehow creating an information model of the real system that you're attempting to model. And this needs to be complete and correct. And how do you do this? Now, some standards exist, but these are not in wide use. And almost none of the large software development projects that have been tendered by Government of India mandate the use of these standards. So let us say you've somehow developed a complete and correct information model. To translate that into software, there's a further consideration. Okay? That the software itself should be a complete and correct implementation of the information model. And these should be addressed by the discipline of software engineering. Very few computer IT engineers are trained in this area. And software engineering as a discipline is not a compulsory requirement. So the way we build large systems today are very different from the way civil engineers or electrical engineers or other guys are constructing systems. They have been used to regulation, they have been used to standards, because safety and quality are well-defined notions in all classical engineering. In software, the culture has been to just develop code. And if it crashes, reboot, make a few changes and restart. So we're not rigorously training our people to reason about the information models that they come up with and reason about the correctness of their implementations. So this is a practical challenge. The reason I say this, that look, I happen to be the chair of ISO IEC's Committee on Software and Systems Engineering. We have 210 published standards. The Bureau of Indian Standards runs the secretariat. And we are in the particularly embarrassing position of having to say that in terms of implementation of these standards within India, we are implementing precisely none. So here is one ministry running the Secretariat for Software and Systems Engineering, and other ministries blissfully ignoring that there are standards that they should follow when they develop and roll out and operate large software systems. Okay? So what is the basis for trustworthiness in software? You could have technical basis, which could be, quality, okay. But the complexity and rapid change makes it hard to adhere to specification. What is the specification? It's very clear. For a classical system, let's say, even if for a system like a car, which is fairly complex, you can produce maybe a 2 or 3,000 page specification of the vehicle. But what is the specification of my, internet banking system? How do I produce a specification? Yeah. Especially with all these SaaS services where they push out new features every day. How do I have a document that says this is the specification and quality means adherence to this specification? So that's a challenge. It's a challenge in the nature of the technology. The safety and security issues, complexity and ease of modification lead to integrity issues, and security failures can cause financial loss and physical harm. Penetrate and patch philosophy by software providers. So they're not proving their system is correct. They're just saying that when we find a problem, we'll fix it. And this seems to be a never-ending thing, and this seems to require a service now. So your dependence upon the provider is not one where you just bought something and walked away, but it's a continuing and integral dependence on that provider to keep giving you updates, sometimes maybe even on a daily basis. Okay? So the second method we've had is risk transference. We used insurance quite effectively, but in the case of cyber systems, lack of data valuation methods and actual data make it very hard to get meaningful insurance. So it's not easy to produce a risk picture and to get a meaningful insurance policy. If you look at the legal assurances we had traditionally, there is a whole body, a mature body of product liability. But in the software area, the product liability, the current status is no warranties. So software producers have stoutly resisted any type of product liability. And it's not because software providers are, particularly sort of bad guys. It's just in the nature of software. So the legal protections that you had traditionally are weaker. And then there is the issue of jurisdiction. The use of the internet as an essential element of software-based systems has created serious jurisdictional challenges. So what's the impact of poor software development, operations, and support? The software by its nature tends to have very many vulnerabilities, and I'll just skip that. I've said that many times. The second major issue is authentication practices. So password-based authentication is conceptually simple, and it remains one of the most widely deployed methods. Okay. The weaknesses are well known, but implementing a passably reliable forgot password feature is expensive. So whenever you do use passwords and whenever the services are critical, you have to provide a forgot password, and how are you going to authenticate on the forgot password? Okay. you do have, so when somebody is forced to move away from passwords, they go to OTP over SMS. See, this externalize the management of the physical device to somebody else. Okay? But an outgoing SMS is charged. So unless there's a kind of a business case like a bank or somebody else, for a smaller organization to leverage this method involves a cost. Every time you send an SMS, you have to pay some money. Not clear how you'll recover that. Okay? And it's not secure. We know these attacks happen. We know they happen very often, more often than not. And targeted social engineering attacks succeed with an alarming success rate. So, with relatively poor software development and operations practices, with this being the situation in authentication, if you look at the citizens' view, our NCRB data shows that cybercrime is increasing and the rate of police and court pendency is very high, with final convictions being very low. Those numbers are something like, final conviction numbers are something like 1 or 2%. 1 or 2% of complaints registered. And the estimate of incidents to complaints registered is about 100:1. So the criminal justice system doesn't seem to be deterring or bringing these perpetrators to book. So most success is likely to be in initiatives that promote awareness of cyber hygiene, and the government could probably do more here in terms of budgetary allocation and execution of awareness programs. And shifting the onus of proof for certain retail type transactions to the service provider organization might compel them to spend more money on user security. So these are sort of thoughts or policy positions. At the enterprise level, okay, most organizations except the largest IT, banking, and telecom organizations lack the human resource to do an acceptable job of managing their data or their cyber security. But there are tens of thousands of organizations that hold data and offer some form of digital services. So there is an Indian standard for adequacy of organizational data management practices, but it's not yet released and not mandatory. So it's just out of print now. The first proof has come out. So with all this talk of data, the question was that, is there an Indian standard that government can use to ask all of its organizations to comply with in terms of managing their data? The first try resulted in a standard which was almost 150 pages. And there's no hope of that getting implemented, so we junked it. The new standard is just about 10-15 pages. It outlines some 10-15 things that an organization should be doing. And it requires an auditor just to make a sort of an assessment as to out of these 15 things, ये हो रहा है कि नहीं हो रहा है, और अगर हो रहा है तो हो रहा है या अच्छे से हो रहा है. So that's translated into some levels, and that's all it is. But to scale that out, to make sure that, for example, if some Gram Panchayat in Jhansi has to be audited, how are you going to get the audit manpower? So there are some sort of initiatives underway to connect with the Institute of Chartered Accountants and cross-train chartered accountants in doing simple data audits. But that's the scale of the problem, where you have a large number of organizations and their ability to take any kind of action is very limited. So there are information security management frameworks like 27001. There are specific guidelines like the CERT-In. Okay, and while there are some types of mandates to implement a security management framework, most organizations view this as a cost and are not prepared to spend more than a certain amount on cybersecurity, since their business model may be unable to absorb that cost. In the current scenario, the cost of compliance is or is seen as much higher than the cost or the consequence of non-compliance. So there's a rough and ready calculation that everybody is making in terms of what is it going to cost me to comply versus what is going to happen if I am not in compliance. Okay, so there is a case for setting guidelines and auditing cybersecurity spend and IT spend as a percentage of total spend ratios. More or less something like you have for banks, that there is a kind of liquidity to asset ratio that needs to be maintained. If you're going to make headway, you're going to have to make sure that certain percentage of your spend is going into IT support and cybersecurity. So if you look at the government view, the government may view this from several perspectives: the security of the critical constituents of the state, security of critical important government and national infrastructure, the security of numerous government entities that may not be classified as critical, but nonetheless hold significant amount of data and discharge important functions, and the security of citizens. So the security of citizens is, in a sense, is a concern for the government as well. And we've discussed the last two in the previous slides. For the first two situations, you are faced with well-funded and highly competent adversaries. There is, given the current state of software development, if you have a well-funded state-sponsored adversary, almost nothing you can do will prevent you from being penetrated. So if it's the NSA or it's the Mossad or any one of such agencies in various countries, it's very difficult to keep yourself safe from them. But not all adversaries are like that, but some are. And if that's your adversary, these infrastructural building blocks for cyber defense and cyber offense are increasingly controlled by very few powerful entities, leading to a deepening strategic dependence. So a focus on indigenization is appropriate in these situations, but you have to place your bets carefully. Otherwise, efforts may be spread too thin, and we don't have good device management systems. We don't have good identity management systems. We don't have good malware detection models. And we don't have a commercially vibrant support ecosystem for open source. We can leverage open source, but if you're going to use open source and deploy it in a systematic way at an enterprise level, you must be able to have commercial support for it. And as a policy matter, the government somehow has to make sure that an ecosystem of local companies that are capable of doing that comes into being. Because otherwise, we won't be able to succeed in the first three bullets. So I think I'm already 4 minutes over time, and I'll just stop here. Okay, guys, I hope that wasn't too boring.
Not at all. Not at all.
Fascinating, Sandeep.
Excellent seminar. Thank you.
There were a couple of questions in the chat box if you want to take a look at those, Sundeep.
Yeah, I will.
If you don't mind.
Yeah, देखता हूँ.
Please. एक तो शिरीष का as usual था googly.
शिरीष का देखता हूँ.
दो हैं.
Okay. India has a large population of illiterate people. How wise it is to move things to computer web-based platforms, and even the literate and educated get scammed online. So that is the dilemma. We just don't have enough people. We don't have the money. So one of my students is just working on some policy issues related to, there is a central government grievance management system. It's, I think, called CP grams or something like that.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
CP grams.
CP grams, there's an initiative called Bhashini also, which is kind of a language translation tool. So there, the kind of thing is that, look, can I give the citizen a multi-channel way of actually lodging various kinds of complaints? If the guy can speak or he can write in whatever language, so there is this vision that somehow at the back end, this will get translated into the preferred language of the organization that has to redress it. So there are all these kinds of schemes that people are coming up with. And this is in desperation because we just don't have enough people to deliver the services that we aspire to. So that is our challenge.
But I mean, if I might interject, I mean, Srinivas, there is no option, right? You can't afford to leave your citizenry behind in the dark ages or the stone ages when the rest of the world moves ahead. So
it's a tough one. You're right. See, is this putting disadvantaged people at a further disadvantage?
yeah,
I know 100%. Okay, that my mother, if she had an ATM card, if she had gone to the ATM, she 100% asked somebody to put it in and would have told what the pin is. So we have a particular demographics and the capability of absorbing new technologies there. But there's another. I'll post that photo. A few days ago, I was going to the airport, and at the airport signal, there's the lady. She was a beggar, but she was watching something on a smartphone. So I don't know whether it's an internet connection or whether it was just some media. But that's where the smartphone is gone. See, beggars at signals have smartphones.
so
That
both
channel exists.
both muskura raha hai because UPI has reached the begging business also.
Yeah. So this is our challenge, right? In the pressure to deploy IT is so high that we are pushing out flaky systems. We're not even doing basic design and support, and that is increasing the vulnerability. And those
Yeah, I mean,
vulnerabilities
most of the people are
initially
not. So, I mean, if you look for support or something like that, most of the transactions are in support, and even the support staff is also speaks English only, and so people who don't even know, how to what terms to use. It's
which is why I was sort of recommending that certain kinds of transactions, if you put the onus of proof on the service provider, then they will have to do more. Right now, the onus of proof is on the citizen. So some kind of policy measure which will reverse the burden of proof at least in retail transactions, will make sure then that people can't roll out absolutely flaky stuff. So it's a tough one. I mean, it's a good question. It's a tough one, but we don't appear to have much of a choice. So I think Shirish is asking whether there are any acceptable standards for managing threats from social engineering. So see, one of the things that people are doing is their cybersecurity departments have sort of taken some budgets and they carry out some sort of they send in some dummy stuff. Right? So you'll send some mail and they'll keep track of how many of their guys have actually fallen for it. But these threats are becoming more sophisticated, right? Because in your normal awareness, you're taught to look for something that's a very generic message that maybe sort of misspelled or poor English, or it doesn't look like it's targeted. But now, if you're able to use some very basic AI kind of tools, you're able to generate messages that are fairly personalized. And that's increasing the success rate. Recently, people have been using, sort of generative AI to generate voice. So there's a chap from Poi, and he got a call from somebody claiming to be in the Indian embassy in Dubai, saying that your son has been arrested. Yeah, and this is is an offense that carries a life sentence. So the first thing we have to do is bail the guy out, and after that we'll see what to do. And you can just talk to him for a short while, and this guy listens to a voice that he thinks is his son. Okay. And he pays some 15 or 20 lakhs. So with these generative AI techniques and with this personalization, the problem is becoming even tougher. So the only thing I can I can say in terms of standard is that people are required to carry out awareness training on social engineering kinds of attacks and are expected to carry out drills. But this is limited to employees of an organization. The government is not undertaking any such major initiative which is targeted at the citizens. Yeah. Although I'm aware of some initiatives in West Bengal. West Bengal government is got a significant awareness program, and they're coming out with comics in local language and so on. But that's where we need to spend a lot more money as a government action point. How do you make sure that the average guy who's using all this technology, okay, because there's no point in telling guys be safe, don't click links and all. What does that mean? That's what you do on a mobile phone. For guys who are not really, writing programs or creating Word documents, if you're online, you're clicking links. That's what you're doing. So that's a
Sundeep,
huge challenge. Yeah.
I have a question if you're through with the chat questions.
Yeah. I have one. Okay. Yeah, just go ahead. So there's somebody else who's asking what's the extent of China targeting US and India. And so this is, I think, again, Shirish, right? No, it's
Actually, it's me. So I was asking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
the extent, and is it increasing
So
both in extent and capability, and also in general, what other countries does it China target?
So about 3 years ago,
Yeah.
I went to one of these track 1.5 events. It was a trilateral, US, China, and India. So the front organizations were the East-West Institute from the US. There is a China Institute of Strategic Studies. And from here, the front organization was the Vivekanand Foundation. Yeah. So this was a track 1.5 thing. So you're able to talk somewhat frankly. So it's nobody is desisting in cyberspace. Okay? The situation with nuclear weapons is that people are not firing missiles at each other. Yeah, with the exception of what's happening in Israel, but generally the big powers are not in a situation where they're firing missiles at each other every day. In cyberspace, that's not the case. So the estimate was the amount of bandwidth over design that we need to do, okay, because of this activity that various states are constantly carrying out, is something like 1,000%. So that's the extent of the estimated over engineering bandwidth that you're doing, because there are a lot of bad actors doing bad stuff. So I don't know what more to make of it. Yeah,
Okay,
Saurabh.
thanks.
Go ahead.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you said that the conviction rate in India is perhaps less than 1%, and even that is also that it is on perhaps less than 1% cases being reported. So it is 0.01 conviction. What is the case internationally? What are the best countries? Are they able to successfully prosecute cybercrime? And what is it that can be done in India? Because you can keep training people, and it'll be an ongoing process, because these guys will always be ahead of whatever instructions are being given out. So that is a failing strategy unless you have a robust criminal justice system which prosecutes these people and convicts them.
Yeah, so see, there's another set of numbers that I didn't mention. It was the pendency numbers. So the pendency is also very high. At the end of it, after 6-7 years, you get a 1%, but there's a massive pendency. So you're right. See, the criminal justice system is not able to effectively deal with this, and even the other controls that we have. If you and me want a SIM card, there will be a lot of KYC and all that. But in Jamtara, you'll have thousands of SIM cards that various characters have. I receive at least once a week a call which says this is from the telecom department. This is regarding disconnection of all SIM cards. These numbers, they're not able to trace them. And see, unless you put the onus for this on the telcos, they're not going to go after them also. So the guys with the money to implement these measures are currently not being held liable for them. And see, getting scammed in this way, if one of us gets scammed for 2,000-3,000 rupees, or maybe even 20,000-30,000 rupees, you'll feel bad. But if your maid loses even 500 rupees in a scam like that, that person risks violence at home and risks being deprived of access to a cell phone. So the repercussions of being scammed out of money for a large category of Indians is very serious. There's recently a guy was fooling around with his parents' phone and similarly clicked a link which downloaded an SMS forwarder. And somebody moved about a lakh of rupees out of the parents' account. And this guy got so scared that he committed suicide. A 16-year-old guy. So a mix of making sure that you have enough bandwidth to at least investigate this. The controls that you're placing on KYC and so on, these are failing grossly. No? Everybody knows that a lot of this is happening out of Mewat, it's happening out of Jamtara. It's, I recall many years ago, I was coming back to IITK, I was at what was at that stage VT, and there's black marketing is openly going on the station. So after waiting for a long time and not getting a ticket, the policeman there, I went and told him, "Boss, इधर black marketing हो रहा है." So this guy, disingenuously say, "कहाँ हो रहा है?" सबको दिख रहा है यार, तेरे को ही नहीं दिख रहा है. So something at this scale cannot happen unless there is significant amount of collusion. And the ordinary citizen is not up to the fight. If you make sure that a retail transaction or something like this, you shift more responsibility, onto the telcos, that you guys are supposed to be doing KYCs. Okay. And if there is a deficiency in the KYC, if that is established, if you're not fined significantly, the benefit, the cost of compliance is more than the cost of non-compliance. So that's the needle that you have to calibrate properly. Okay, guys.
Sandeep, if
Any
you
more?
have a minute
Yeah.
or two, other than sort of the general, the three things you mentioned, there was a fourth. So you said device management, identity management, which is passwords, multi-factor authentication, etc. Malware detection, having at least some basic AVS, antivirus on your personal devices.
Yeah.
You mentioned very few people follow good cyber hygiene. I mean, is there a
Yeah.
component of cyber hygiene you haven't talked about for individuals, families? I mean,
Yeah, see, many people don't have passwords on their laptops. Right? So they're logged in as administrator, it's your personal thing. So when bad stuff comes in, that has administrator privileges. So I have a colleague, the TCS guy. So this guy was paranoid. So whenever he'd browse, he had a separate user that it created. And that he would log in as that user. And that user had almost no privileges.
sorry, had no
And he
what?
browsed, had
No
almost no
privilege.
privileges. No
Okay.
admin privilege, not too many write privileges, nothing. So if that account got compromised, there's not a lot it could do in. So there are things like this that you can probably do, but it's it's very difficult to get somebody without a specific understanding of computers to actually do that.
Yes.
And
Hi, Sundeep. Pankaj here. Pankaj Sethi.
hi, Pankaj.
Great talk. Great talk. I had one question for you. You rightly mentioned, I think, that enterprises need to be uh, forced to take more responsibility about security aspects. What is your opinion about the security in two of our biggest government applications, Aadhaar and DigiLocker?
That's a good question. See, the the government has been reluctant to have a sort of an open dialogue. We know that every software system, okay, has its problems. And the more you can discuss them openly, the better the chances that you'll fix them. Right? There used to be the old philosophy in cryptography, which held that security was in keeping the algorithm secret.
Yeah.
And over time, the security community has realized that, look, the security algorithm should be as well known as possible so that any vulnerabilities can be brought out quickly. The only security that you need is in the key. So
Right.
all of these, see, TCS didn't build the first version of the Aadhaar, but the second version, I think TCS built. See, every software system has its defects, and there's a process of keeping it secure. So as long as you operate a system diligently,
I think is everybody's screen frozen or only mine?
Unable
Mine
to
Yeah,
too.
it is
hear.
frozen.
you should be able to contain.
Mine
I
is
think
frozen
Sundeep is
also.
frozen.
I think Sandeep just
Is
got hacked. Sandeep just got hacked.
Only Sundeep's is
Sandeep got
frozen.
hacked, yeah.
He has fallen off, I think.
Aadhaar is to be used to authenticate a transaction. Aadhaar. Would you use? Mine isn't frozen. Mine isn't frozen.
Sandeep, would you mind repeating the last about minute of your answer, please? Thank you.
Yeah. So what I said is that if you go to an ATM, and
Yeah.
you want to use it using Aadhaar, would you use your face or your finger? Would you use it as a user ID or will you use it as a password?
I think it should be
You
user
never
ID.
intended to, yes. Never intended to use the password. You put in your finger and then that recognizes that this is the user. Yeah. Now, how to authenticate a transaction? So you still require that whole mechanism of authentication. The biometric can replay on a wire, right? So it's only in a supervised scenario where you're physically sitting in front of a person and then presenting about there is some assurance that this is you because it's you, whatever action you're doing, so authenticated. But over the wire, if I just present biometric, that's just my indication over, thing that they're able to generate some economies out of. But from the security standpoint, it's probably not the greatest idea.
Okay,
So I don't know
thanks.
whether
Thanks,
Pankaj
Sandeep.
was asking about whether you're asking about the security, the infrastructure itself. That's another matter.
Yeah, my point was more about, how safe is our data with the government in the context of what you said, that, the service provider agency needs to take more responsibility. So can I count on the government, taking that kind of responsibility as far as Aadhaar and DigiLocker are concerned specifically?
It's a very delicate question to ask and an even more delicate one to answer.
Yeah, well, let's leave it for the time being.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yes, Sandeep, one
I
quick question I put on the chat. Is there, you talked about a skill set shortage and manpower shortage and all that in one of your charts. How are these Accenture and other companies trying to develop skill set of their analysts and putting them in the bandwagon of cybersecurity for large companies? Are large companies investing their own talent, or are they outsourcing it to like TCS, Accenture, etc.?
Usually, most of our customers have certain functions that they like to keep in house. Yeah. So that's, almost always the case. But there are certain governance functions, certain oversight functions which they want to keep with themselves. Whereas the routine operational stuff of operating and supporting the very many tools that they have, that's the kind of stuff they like to outsource. And also things like, when you typically run a security monitoring center, you need eyes on glass. So you need at least one 24/7 ability to look at a screen. So those are the kinds of things that they outsource. And those are also associated with larger numbers. And it's more money. Whereas the governance oversight, some of the more sophisticated threat hunting functions, that they typically try and keep in-house.
Sandeep, just to
Thank you.
build on that, as you said, most enterprises will have their own SOCs, and whether they outsource it or they will keep it in-house is more economic decision. But I think coming back to what Rajiv Kapuria said is, from a personal security perspective as individuals, because we know the challenges of the government, the enterprises, etc. What steps should we as individuals follow? Because some of these things are not going to change significantly. What should we follow? Like you said, okay, if you're browsing, then maybe create a different user ID, have passwords. So what are some of the simple steps that we should do as individuals, which we can have also our families implement? That, because if there's a vulnerability in one part of the family, it affects the whole thing. The whole Barbie doll example, which was the initial way of penetrating a household. That's the question really to you, or to build on what Rajiv had asked. What can we do from a personal hygiene perspective, or cyber hygiene as you call it? Did we lose Sundeep?
Yeah, looks like I can't hear
Yeah,
anything.
it's frozen again. Yeah.
But I see some people actually freeze their credit score. Like I think Gopal does it. So I don't know, is that common? Is that something that anyone does?
What do you mean freeze?
So
I don't know. You can lock your credit thing, so no one can do anything unless. I'm sorry.
I can share what happened very recently, meaning few months ago, yes, 2-3 months ago. So AT&T, one of the largest telcos and telecom companies in the US, its database got hacked. And about 7.6 million customers of AT&T lost all that information was hacked. And I'm one of those fortunate, lucky ones whose information was hacked. So all my information, date of birth, address, mobile number, email address, social security number, all of that is available on the dark web. You want to pay something, you can buy it. And so one of the things I did is I upgraded antivirus on my laptop. I put multi-factor authentication on all my email accounts, and not on the same device. So one on a password, something goes to the phone. And I locked out. I put a freeze on all 3 credit reporting bureaus in the US.
Rajiv, one of the things that you can do is put in a VPN, which kind of misdirect, which you can choose where, I guess, which IP address or which location you want to have your VPN address to serve. If someone were to see where you're coming from, it looks like you're coming from Sweden or Africa or someplace like that. It helps maintain some level of privacy in terms of what you're doing, but again, that's standard available on any antivirus or a device like, let's say, Norton and all will have that, where you put in a VPN on top of it, in addition to whatever you talk about.
Yeah,
Sandeep is back.
Yeah. So now there is this little bit of a VPN controversy here as well. So government is saying you can't use VPNs, or VPN servers should be in India, etc. There's another thing I do. See, I have this bootable USB drive. So I have a Linux Mint installation here. So when I'm using a really dodgy network, I boot off this. It creates an OS and a file system that's completely in memory. Do whatever browsing I want to. And once I pull it out, everything is gone. It's just not doing anything to my actual laptop. Whenever I travel overseas, I use two phones. Okay? One of them doesn't have a SIM. So whenever I'm on Wi-Fi, I use that phone. And I periodically just factory reset it. So if you're in networks or in situations where you're not sure about the security, then these are two things you can do. Connect using a mobile without a SIM card that you just factory reset periodically, or make a bootable Mint drive which you just boot off it, or do those many other things that collectively will make it much harder for somebody to hack you. But that's the point, that there are these many little things that you can do, but it's hard to turn it into a prescription for somebody who is not at a particular level of familiarity with computers.
Actually, what Sundeep is talking about, I think, is a very real situation where you just go to an airport, and there are a lot of insecure places there. You want internet access, you use one of those. That is very dangerous without the kind of stuff that Oberoi just talked about. Especially I mean, you can go to, let's say, San Francisco airport, there'll be a spoof internet there which says San Francisco public internet, which is not really real, which somebody else has set up just to capture stuff. I think that's a form of vulnerability which, to address Sundeep's point, is something which is not easily understood by the common person, and where they are extremely vulnerable for. But it does require a little bit of sophistication, but it's worth investigating that to basically address a very common vulnerability.
Yeah. And but doing things like this probably can help a lot. If you were to take an analogy with the pandemic, it's like the regular washing of hands and wearing a mask, as opposed to the more sophisticated treatment methods, giving a guy oxygen or having all those kinds of things. These basic cyber hygiene things, we need to see more of these compiled into small to-do lists or best practices, etc., and evangelized more in an official way by the government.
Sandeep, I wanted to ask you, or anybody else for that matter. So I use software called Sophos. So it protects laptops, and it also protects mobile also. Right? You should take a license, and it can protect up to 10 things. So any idea how good or bad that is in terms of protection of a mobile? It has Sophos interceptor.
See, almost all of these guys are reasonably good for the typical kinds of threats that you might face. Okay? But that still doesn't mean that you shouldn't frequently change your passwords. Yeah? This also brings us to another important thing, that you probably have 30 or 40 accounts that you use, and all of them have passwords, right? So most
Right.
people have just the same password in every place, or they have 2 or 3 password variants. All critical things like bank and all that will be one password. All the other not so critical things will be some other password. So what do you do about this? Do you actually write it down in a little black book, or do you use a password manager? Okay? But your passwords, you need to manage somehow. You have this antivirus, whether it's Sophos, McAfee, all of these are decent, and they'll largely they will keep you safe. But your own passwords, somehow, you do need to manage them in some effective way. Yeah? So using a password manager is a good idea, but also with your whole life being digital, yeah, you have to have some kind of a continuity strategy. Yeah? So I always think about, I've got all these passwords. If I'm crossing the road and a car knocks me down, what does my family do? So if the passwords are only in my head or they are in some password manager and nobody knows the master password to that, this is an issue, right? So the more this becomes critical, the more you have to manage your passwords in a way that they will be accessible to your family in the event of some eventuality. You have to think that through as well. So does that mean you're going to use a password manager, but the master password is going to be there in some physical form that you manage? Yeah. But this
So there's an app called LastPass on iPhone. My sister uses that.
proliferation
Pretty
problem will
effective.
happen. Yeah. Yeah. So there are a number of good ones.
Sandeep, can I make a request to you? The
Yeah.
talk has been very good. We've got some good suggestions for personal thing, whether it's Netgate or you talk, other people talk, Rajiv said. Can you sort of help summarize that and circulate to the group on one of the chat groups, because then it'll become a ready reckoner for people to go ahead. Otherwise, all of us will take some of the things. Like you said, change your password regularly or whatever other things there or tools to do.
Yeah.
That would be immensely useful for all of us, because we can then forward it to some of our family members, there, and for them also to look at that. That'll be very useful.
Yeah. Okay.
Sundeep, thanks. You want to drop off?
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you
Okay,
so much.
Thanks.
Good night.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank
Hey,
you.
and Sap
Thank you.
and Khusro, thank you as always.
Thank you. Thank you for
Organizing.
setting it up.
Guys.
Great
Thanks,
learning.
guys.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.